Hello, everyone. I'm the student of life, a student of life. So let's get to learning. Today we're learning about various invasive noxious weeds found in Pierce County, Washington. The Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board categorizes noxious weeds into one of three classes, either A, B, or C. Class A are non-native species that are not widespread in the state and therefore limited. Class B are non-native species that have a limited distribution in portions of the state, and Cs are either weeds that are widespread or the agricultural industry took a special interest in. Now, before I get to the first one, I have a couple of honorary mentions for invasive noxious weeds. These are Scotch broom and English ivy. Let's get into our first one, a plant used as an antidepressant, common St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum. What is its class? Which family does it belong to? Does it have any other names? Where is it native to? People call the common St. John's wort a Class C weed belonging to the family Cluaceaceae by a few other names, including clawmothweed and common goatweed. This weed is native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. How does one distinguish it from others? The weed's flowers are yellow and have black dots on the edges. This weed has purplish black or transparent dots along the edges of its leaves. When holding up the leaves up to the light, one can see these dots. Their glands contain the chemical compound hypericin. How invasive is this weed? This weed spreads by seed, underground stems called rhizomes, and above ground creeping stems. As it grows in dense patches, it crowds out beneficial or native species. Why is it noxious? Any light-skinned animal or human eating its leaves become hypersensitive to light. This leads to skin blistering in the sunlight and general discomfort. These are symptoms caused by hypericin. How do you tell this weed apart from other plants? First, the common tansy has button-like flowers with no petals. Second, the tansy ragwort has daisy-like flowers with 13 petals. Flipping over to the back now. What climate is this weed adapted to? Which spots does it get established in, and where does it spread afterward? Common St. John's wort prefers poor soil and sunny spots, but it adapts well to various temperate climates and soil types. This weed establishes itself in disturbed, well-drained sites such as roadways, trails, logged areas, and other similar locations. From there, it invades pastures, healthy rangeland, and other habitats. Does one need to control this weed? What is the best method to control a small/new infestation? What other control methods work? How are large infestations controlled? One doesn't have to deal with this weed unless required by law. For small/new infestations, the best method is to uproot them entirely. Don't leave the root behind as it could resprout. Agricultural methods such as planting beneficial/native species could also work. For large infestations, it is best to use herbicides. Check the PNW Weed Management Handbook or contact your county's noxious weed coordinator to see what to use. Once you have the herbicide, read all labeled directions and precautions before using it. One should spray the weed before the plant blooms if possible. If not possible, spray the unwanted plant in the early morning or the evening. If you do this, you can avoid when the bees are most active. Let's now talk about a spiny weed. It is gorse, Ulex europaeus. What class is it in? Are there any other common names people call it? Which family does it belong to? Where is it native to? Gorse, a Class B noxious weed, belongs to the pea, bean, and legume family Fabaceae. Its other name is the European gorse, and it is native to Europe. How do you distinguish this weed from other vegetation? Gorse has yellow sailboat-like flowers, sharing this characteristic with others in the pea family. The weed has trifoliate leaves that turn into spines when they mature, and the plant stem turns from green to brown when it matures. Why is this considered invasive? This weed aggressively outcompetes other native and beneficial plants thanks to the nitrogen-fixing bacteria in its roots. Its seeds scatter thanks to the seed pods bursting. Animals, machinery, and water can carry these seeds further. Why is it considered noxious? This weed forms dense patches crowding out other plant species. Next, this dense weed forms a natural barrier to water or food sources. Finally, its stems have a high oil content. The high oil content, along with the dead foliage left behind at its center, makes this weed a fire hazard. How to tell two other weeds apart from gorse. First, the camel thorn has pink/maroon flowers. Second, the brooms are not as dense and have zero obvious spines. It is time to flip over to the back now. Where does it like to grow? Where does this weed invade? It likes to grow in cool, temperate regions with dry to semi-moist, low fertility soil and no significant competition. When it spreads, it will spread to open sites such as pastures, hillsides, riverbanks, forest edges, and other similar spots. How should one control this spiny plant? First, report any new growth to the County Noxious Weed Control Board. Second, if it came from a gorse-infested area, remove any seeds that stuck to your boots, vehicles, and animals. For a small infestation, the best means is a combo of manual plus cultural. Pull the plant out, including the roots, remove it from the site to remove a fire hazard, then plant beneficial species. If dealing with a large infestation, controlling it can be done with a combo of mechanical plus chemical. That's if it is mature. Cut stems first, then spray the tender new shoots with the herbicide. No cutting the plant until after it has died. This may take multiple applications. Always refer to the directions and note the precautions when using herbicides. As we move on to our next one, a deadly noxious weed whose common name was first used in William Shakespeare's King Henry V, the poison hemlock, Conium maculatum. What weed class is poison hemlock in? Does it have any other names? What family does it belong to? Where is it native to? Poison hemlock, a Class B noxious weed, belongs to the carrot and celery family, Ipiaceae. Its other names are fool's parsley and spotted hemlock. It is native to North Africa, Europe, and Asia. How do you tell this plant apart from others? The best feature used to distinguish the poison hemlock is the purple/reddish splotches on its hollow, hairless stem. It also has musky smelling, especially when crushed, bright green fern-like leaves. Its tiny white 5-petal flowers grouped in umbrella-shaped clusters, and its first-year rosette form has a low clump of lacy leaves and reddish spotted stems. In its second year, it sprouts flowering stems. Why is this one considered invasive? How is it noxious? It's invasive as it can aggressively crowd out desired vegetation and it spreads rapidly by seed. The reason this weed is noxious is that it is acutely toxic to animals and humans. It doesn't take much for a fatal dose, about 4 ounces for an adult human, 16 ounces for a large animal and far less for a child. Even a tiny amount can cause problems, especially to pregnant animals, as that will cause malformations in the fetus. If you ever think you accidentally ingested this plant, you do not pass go. You do not collect $200. You go straight away to the hospital. Early symptoms show up after 15 to 60 minutes. These include a burning sensation in the mouth, nausea, vomiting, confusion, respiratory depression, and muscle paralysis. Eventually, you'll die from the alkaloid toxin paralyzing your respiratory muscles, thus removing your ability to breathe. Given that there is no antitoxin developed for this plant, the hospital will put you on a ventilator to help you breathe. As a warning, no part of this plant is safe to eat. One can also get poisoned by blowing on the stem, and one's skin may absorb the poison into the body. The other reason it's noxious is because it produces allelochemicals. Allelochemicals inhibit other plants' roots from growing. How do you tell this plant from others? All plants in the deadly weeds family look fairly similar. For wild carrots, look for hairs on the stem, and if it has bloomed, then see if it has a red/purplish flower. For wild chervil stems are either hairless or sparsely covered in soft hair and has grooved, hairy leaves. It is time to flip over to the back. What conditions does it like? Where does it invade? Poison hemlock prefers areas with moist soil and lots of sun, but it can adapt to areas with drier soil and less sunlight. It invades ravines, areas by rivers or streams, roadsides, unmanaged yards, open fields, pastures, cultivated field edges, and a few other spots. If it gets into pastures, one may mix this into livestock feed by accident. How do you keep this weed under control? First, report it to the County Noxious Weed Control Board. As a warning, do not burn or compost it. Composting it has its own issues, but burning it can release the toxins into the air. If you want to control hemlock, it depends on the infestation size. For a small/new infestation, dig and pull it out entirely, including the roots. Remember to wear gloves and protective clothing. Also put it in a trash bag and put it in the trash. Do not leave any plant parts around. For a large infestation, you can control it with a mix of chemical and cultural methods. To effectively use a herbicide, cut the stems first before you spray it. You should do so before the plant blooms. You'll have to spray the infestation multiple times to control or potentially eradicate it. You should wait until it has died before you cut the affected stems. On the cultural side, you cultivate beneficial or native species to help prevent any further infestations. Time to move on to a weed with an irritating sap. It's the egg-leaf spurge, Euphorbia oblongata. What noxious weed class does it belong to? Which family does it belong to? Does it have any other names? Where is it native to? The other names for the egg-leaf spurge, a Class A weed belonging to the family Euphorbiaceae, are the oblong spurge and Balkan spurge. One can find it in Turkey and Southeast Europe. How do you tell this weed apart from others? It has yellow clustered flowers, with all of them being male except for one female flower. Below the flower head, it has yellow bracts and a whorl of yellow-green leaves beneath that. The leaves themselves are egg-shaped, aren't hairy, and have a prominent mid-vein. Finally, one can notice the fine white hairs covering its stem, and that the stem branches out at the tips. How invasive is this plant? Why is it noxious? The egg-leaf spurge shares similar competitive and invasive strategies to the leafy spurge. meaning it spreads rapidly. It spreads by seed ejected from fully mature seed pods. By the way, this is a drought-tolerant weed, meaning it can spread to areas with soil that has a low water content. Let's talk about the noxious part. The egg-leaf spurge's leaves, if cut, release a caustic, milky sap. This caustic sap, when it makes contact, irritates the skin or wherever else, including, if eaten, humans or animals' digestive tracts. One should avoid contact with the sap. This weed displaces desirable forage plants that the animal feeds on and reduces the size of the feeding ground area. For similar plants, how do you tell this weed apart from them? I'll discuss one of them. The myrtle spurge's succulent stem has succulent gray-green leaves attached to it in a spiral formation. Time to flip to the back. Where does this one like to establish itself, and where can it invade? This weed establishes itself in disturbed open areas. This plant invades damp meadows, stream banks, very dry hillsides, roadsides, waste areas, etc. Regarding hillsides, it thrives in sandy and rocky soil similar to what one finds in the Mediterranean area. How does one control this weed? Report any infestations to the Noxious Weed Control Board and eradicate the weed. The best method of controlling it is through prevention. Don't let it go to seed, and one must monitor for any new shoots or seedlings. If this prevention cannot be done, next method is to dig and pull out everything, including the roots. You should wear gloves because of the irritating sap. The other method is through chemicals. You apply the herbicide to the weed several times, typically 3 times over the growing season. Please refer to the PNW Weed Management Handbook or contact your county's noxious weed coordinator. If you can't spray it before it blooms. If it bloomed already, do your best to avoid the times when the bees are most active. Now, onto our final weed, once used as a source of indigo blue dye in the past. Let me introduce the dyer's woad, Isatis tinctoria. What class does this weed land in? Which family does it belong to? What other names does it go by? Where is it native to? Dyer's woad, a Class A weed, belongs to the cabbage and mustard family, Brassicaceae. This weed's other names are Malahan mustard and the asp of Jerusalem, and one can find it in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. How do you tell this weed apart from others? Foremost, you can tell this weed by small yellow cross-shaped 4-petal flowers, a characteristic shared by other plants in this family. One can find bluish-green leaves on the plant during its rosette stage, its first year, and these are on the stalk. Later on, once it's no longer in its rosette stage, its leaves are lance-shaped, alternating on the stem, and have a cream-colored mid-vein and aren't on the stalk. Finally, the dyer's woad has pear-shaped fruit pods that start off green but turn black or dark purplish-brown when they've matured. It makes it look like the area was ravaged by a wildfire. How invasive is this weed? This weed is invasive because it can outcompete native vegetation and it spreads quickly by seed. Why is it noxious? It is non-palatable to animals and humans, reducing food availability and can limit root development of surrounding plants. Last, it also affects the crop and range quality. How do you tell this plant apart from others? First, the hoary cress has white flowers and not yellow. Second, the Dalmatian toadflax grows from one main stem. Time to flip to the back. Where does this weed first get established in? Which areas can it spread to afterward? Dyer's woad establishes itself in disturbed areas such as roadsides, gravel pits, levees, and other similar spots. It can establish in rocky and sandy soils with a minimum water holding capacity. When it spreads, it invades well-vegetated rangelands, pastures, forests, waterways, cropland, and a few other spots. In pastures, it can get mixed in with livestock feed. How do you control this plant if it is in a hard-to-reach spot? And if it is not in a hard-to-reach spot, how do you control it? In the hard-to-reach spots, the best method is to pull it or dig it out by hand. One must remove the root entirely to prevent it from resprouting. If you go with a chemical root, you spray the weed with herbicides when it's in the seedling stage or the rosette stage. You are required by law to eradicate it. I'm ending on a contact page for both Pierce County Noxious Weed Control Board and Washington State's NWCB. To let you all know, all Class A weeds and most of the Class B weeds are on Washington State's quarantine list. According to Washington State's law, you're prohibited from buying, selling, offering for sale, transporting, or distributing plants and plant parts within the state of Washington. This also goes for seed packets, flower seed blends, and wildflower mixes that include seeds from quarantined species. Last part, we'll cover the number of seeds a single member of the weed species produces per year. Common St. John's wort produces 15,000 to 34,000 seeds. Gorse produces 18,000 seeds. A poison hemlock plant produces 40,000 seeds. And Dyer's woad can be anywhere from 350 to 500 seeds. But some Dyer woad's plants can produce as many as 10,000 seeds. I don't have any data for the egg leaf spurge's annual seed production. Anyhow, I hope I helped others learn about noxious weeds and how to identify them. I'll leave you all with one last piece of advice. As the world keeps on turning, one can keep on learning. Thank you for tuning into my presentation, and goodbye.